Now in Tuliga, its fiction is truth. Anjana Shankar in conversation with Arundhati Roy. Anjana Shankar. Anjana Shankar's media action envelops human trafficking, terrorism, refugee issues, gender discrimination, and global crisis. She, who reported the war in Yemen and the Rohingya refugee issue, currently works in the UAE's Khaleej Times. She is familiar to Malayalis with the criticism of women's entrance into Sabrimala. Welcome to KLF's 4th edition, ma'am. Arundhati Roy. Arundhati Roy is an Indian author. She is best known for her novel, The God of Small Things, which won the Man Booker Prize for Fiction in 1997. This novel became the biggest selling book by a non-expatriate Indian author. She is also a political activist involved in human rights and environmental causes. The publication of The God of Small Things catapulted the Roy to international fame. It reached 4th position on the New York Times bestsellers list for independent fiction. She has written numerous essays on contemporary politics and culture. They have been collected by Penguin India in a 5-volume set. Her second novel, entitled The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, was published in June 2017 by Penguin India and Hamish Hamilton, UK. This novel has been chosen for the Man Booker Prize 2017 long list. We welcome you to the 4th edition of Kerala Literature Festival. Arundhati, ma'am.
Thank you.
The session starts.
Hello? Yeah. So with this formal introduction, I think I can straight plunge into the conversation with the writer who has given the unconsoled world the ministry of utmost happiness and, of course, the God of small things. You know, Arundhati is a writer who has always lent her voice to the voiceless, to the oppressed, and people who are in the lower strata of the society. So I think at a time when we see free speech being stifled, I think it's all the more relevant and crucial that we listen to Arundhati Roy. Welcome, Arundhati. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Anjana. I should just quickly say that, I mean, we said this last evening too, that one of the things I've said is that I actually don't lend my voice to the voiceless, because I don't believe there's any such thing as the voiceless, but only the deliberately suppressed or the preferably unheard. So I don't see myself as a representative of anybody, but as a person who lives in this world and doesn't represent but includes the people who live here on this world with me.
Okay, that's a great take to begin with. Arundhati, you've always said that fiction is not just a genre for you, it is more like your universe. So when you wrote God of Small Things, and then when you came up with your second novel, it took almost 20 years. So in those 20 years, the whole world has changed around you. India has changed, its politics, its people. There was no social media at that time. Even literature has changed. So I would like to find out, when you came back to your personal universe, was it intact there? Or all these chaos in the outside universe completely altered it?
Well, obviously, after writing The God of Small Things, I didn't think of myself as somebody who needs to just keep writing or doing the same thing. And yes, the world has changed, and perhaps I have changed. I hope I've changed. It's important to change, And the 20 years of walking, fighting, arguing, jumping into that massive stream of conversations that go on in this country, being part of it. The reason that then the Ministry of Utmost Happiness began to build itself up in me, because I began to feel that the complexity of the things that I was hearing were outside of just merely a political argument, So, for example, although many people think that they think of the ministry as somehow a distillation of a lot of the political writing I've done, it isn't that. Because, for instance, a great section of the book has to do with Kashmir, looked at in different ways, from the eyes of an intelligence officer, through the eyes of a strange woman called Tilotama, through the eyes of Musa, who's a militant there. And in truth, I haven't really written much nonfiction about Kashmir because I knew that the only way that I could really say what I wanted to is through fiction. Because it's not just about torture reports or human rights violations or statistics of blindings or whatever. It's about how the air is full of terror. It's about negotiations that go on in very complex ways, about collaborators, fighters, double agents, triple agents, children, all kinds of things, So it's not that I went to Kashmir with this idea that, oh, let me write a book or let me write a project. No, I'm not someone who has a project and then goes to fulfill it. It's something that began happening inside me as I lived my life, So way back, like maybe 14 years ago when I first started to go to Kashmir, the first thing I started to do was to write what is in the ministry called the Kashmiri English alphabet, because I suddenly saw that this politics of an occupied people has a whole different vocabulary,
I'm quite intrigued because in this last 20 years, you've walked with the comrades, you've spent time with Maoists, and you have been into Kashmir, and you've kind of rubbed shoulders with them, seen all these, in close quarters. So as a journalist myself, who has been to these conflict zones, where you see the most hopeless places, can you explain how is it different from that a writer process all these information and these sites that you see? How is it different from journalists? And there are so many reportages coming out, and TV channels are all over the place. So for the public, how is it different from how would a journalist portray a problem and a writer like you would do that?
I think the fundamental difference perhaps is that I don't go there with an assignment in mind, I don't go there thinking I have to do a neutral reportage or someone has commissioned me to tell this story or to cover this. I go there out of a kind of personal curiosity, and I go there knowing that I'm also part of this world, So I go there with, it's in a way, I remember long ago at the time I wrote The God of Small Things, it was of course in the late 90s, and one had begun to see the effect of this new neoliberal economics in the cities, in the villages. You just see these massive displacement going on. You could see the cities filling up with people who were not wanted. The villages they were being pushed out of, the cities they were not wanted. And at that time, my own fortunes were rising, I was the author of a book that was selling millions of copies, and I began to wonder, what does it mean to be a writer?
And you suddenly had this money gushing at you.
Yeah, and what does it mean to be in this world, to be a writer? What do you do with that money also, how do you use it in solidarity, not in charity, All these things were very much part of thinking of what it means to be a writer, traveling, trying to understand, and knowing that I could see at the same time that literature was becoming a part of the market. Writers, such as myself, were almost, there was a great invitation to me to be this product, this face of the new, aggressive, nuclear, Hinduizing India. So I stepped off that, and then as I started to walk, I began to be part of other worlds. And to me, that is my greatest reward and my greatest royalty, that I am, therefore invited into places that others are not, you know, only because of what I have written before, only because there's a certain trust that's created, you know. So, I mean, whether it's in South Africa, or whether it's in Poland, or whether it's in Bastar, or whether it's in Kashmir, writing takes me into the heart of things in ways which nothing else could. And that gives me such happiness to know that the word, the written word, in today's age of videos and movies and WhatsApp and fake news and all of that, the written word still holds such a place in people's hearts, you know. Even to see all of you here at this festival, not just for me, but for other writers, it's a very wonderful feeling. You know, I really love to see you all here. It's amazing.
It's a fantastic crowd also today. Arundhati, you've always maintained that, you know, the real thing to be a writer is to be unpopular. And I think you've done a good job about it, because, you know, there is a section in India that thinks that writers like Arundhati Roy belongs to the Tukde gang of India, you know, people who wants to break the country. But, you know, because you deal with both fiction and non-fiction, you've written all these essays, you know, which has taken on political causes, does it give you the kind of flexibility and that bandwidth to be a popular writer across the world, the most venerated writer, I must say, and also at the same time, an unpopular critic? Isn't that a fine balance that you maintain?
That's a good observation. You know, what I said is that, you know, years ago, when I first went into the Narmada Valley and I met people in the valley, the activists, Medha, all the other activists, and you know, I was going to write The Greater Common Good, and I told Medha, I said, Medha, when I write it, there'll be a great attempt to divide us. There'll be a great attempt to try and make out that I'm somehow claiming to be an activist or a leader of this movement. And I want you to know that I have no interest in being anything but the writer that tells this story. You know, so let's just ignore all the troublemaking in the middle. And often people ask me, you know, I mean, often people try to confuse the fact that a writer who writes politically is some kind of a leader. And I keep saying, that can't happen, because I'm the opposite of a politician, you know. A politician, and I respect it, you know, that a politician goes among the people and says, please vote for me. That's the opposite of what I do. I say, I want to understand, and I might say things that don't please you. I'm not asking you to vote for me. I'm just saying I need to live freely. I need to write freely. And that might not be popular. My job is not to be popular, you know. It's not that I'm longing to be unpopular, but that is not my brief, you know, that I've got to say something that majority people will agree with, or that will get this many likes on Facebook, or that many retweets. That's not my brief. It might happen. It might happen that when I write, it does happen that, you know, I do happen to be a writer that is widely read, but that's not the place I start from, you know?
So you're not in the business of pleasing people, but, you know, it's not easy to be a critic, especially in the current political climate that we see. You know, but you still have been a vocal critic of the current government and the right wing.
And the past government.
And the past too, yes. But, you know, what is happening now is that any of these voices of dissent, it's getting suppressed. And there have been instances where these voices have been silenced, as in the case of Gauri Lankesh. And I think that was a watershed moment for India's free speech, that a journalist who voiced her criticism was gunned down in daylight. How did that affect you personally? What kind of impact did that leave it in you?
Well, it was horrifying for me, because I still have Gauri's message on my phone days before this happened, where she just told me her last message was to me was, I loved the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, and there's a picture of her holding it up. And so obviously just personally it was horrible. And what is happening in this country is that censorship has been outsourced to the mob. And so we live in times where free speech is not being censored by a censor board, or that is happening too. But as we see now, any group of people who have political clout can decide how they wish to be represented, what their history should be. They have the right to burn down cinema halls. They have the right to kill people. They have the right to what they did to Perumal Murugan. They have the right to, more or less rampage through the world of ideas with clubs and frighten people. So it's true that, right now there's a sort of slight opening that is giving some of us some hope that the people of this country are standing up, maybe not for the reasons that someone like myself was so shocked when this regime came to power, a regime that has really proudly almost owned up to massacres and cow lynching and all of that. But for various economic reasons, maybe now we may hope to see some sort of change. But I think the danger will not pass, even if this regime is not in power, because all these institutions have been compromised. And people who are going around killing people, even killing ordinary people, and let's say it didn't begin with, look at people like Binayak Sen, who were jailed even in the Congress regime, So there is an atmosphere that is very, very dangerous. And in that atmosphere, we don't know what we are fighting, or who we are fighting, or what will suddenly come at us, So surely when I was writing the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, especially a few years ago, I really had to tell myself that write it how you want to write it, and then keep it in your drawer. Don't publish it, Write it how you want to write it. I wasn't aware that once I finished writing it, the writer's ego will not allow that book to stay in the drawer, Of course, I'm not going to keep it in my drawer. There's a kind of crazy courage that comes from wanting it to be in the world. But then you have to be strategic, So I literally, for me and my publishers, it was released like a military strategy, I decided, it was a risk, but I decided, let it come out in India. I won't do any events. I won't, because I didn't even want it to come out to some cheap political kind of polemic, So fortunately, it was translated, it's been translated into 49 languages, so I just traveled a lot. I went from country to country, I spoke, thousands of people would come, and that way I was reinforcing myself. That let it be a big fight, and let it be on my terms, So how we live in these times as writers, as filmmakers, as politicians or just as ordinary people is going to get more and more complex because of, because of fake news, because of rumors. I mean, just before the book came out, we had that moment where a piece of fake news that came out in Pakistan about me had Paresh Rawal saying, let's use her as a human shield in Kashmir. Yes. And, so for me, I would never, when people say brave, I say, no, I'm not brave. I think it's very stupid to underestimate the climate in which we live. And yet we live, we write. It's like a dance, you have to know, or you have to risk it. You have to say something, you have to retreat, you have to step sideways, you have to change. You have to change it up, do different things and try and say what you want. I mean, after all, let's not forget that in the Soviet Union, I mean, there was censorship beyond anything we can even imagine. And yet, such great literature, such great poetry came out of there, So there is never a situation in which people are not up against it in history. And I think we, as writers, will manage to say what we want to say and say it beautifully, but think about it carefully.
Okay. But, all these years, with these kind of contradictions that you spoke about, when you want to say what you want to say, but at the same time there is this kind of, fear. You continue to live in India, right? You live in Delhi. Was there a moment, any time, that you wanted to move out? Did you ever feel threatened?
Well, yeah. I mean, there was just one moment when that happened, and that wasn't wanting to move out, but at the time when I had just nearly finished writing The Ministry, I mean, I just knew that there was just weeks in which to finish it. And that happened to coincide with the time when the whole unrest was starting in JNU. I know Omar Khalid was, I think he's here or maybe just left, but, he was being completely defamed on TV. Kanhaiya Kumar had been arrested. These mobs were entering the courtrooms. And there were people on television who were literally saying, yeah, these people have to be silenced. But what about the person who's the woman who wrote about the parliament attack, who wrote about Kashmir, who wrote about, Gujarat? Why is she not, I mean, clear? And I mean, I remember one night going up this dark staircase to have dinner with a friend, and I could hear the TV on in the flat, and this guy shouting, ki, koi bhi ho, Arundhati Roy bhi ho, hum usko nahi chhodenge, And my vulnerability was only because I was trying to protect this work that I had been working on for 10 years. And that night, I got to say, I lost my nerve. And I just got on a flight and went to London with my book. And I thought, I'll just finish it, And then I just froze. I remember just sitting in the restaurant, in the breakfast place of this hotel. And I mean, a friend came to see me, and I just couldn't speak. I was just crying. I said, do you know, what are they doing to this country? They're just shattering it, just breaking it. And within 3 or 4 days, I realized that I can't be that person who has run away, So I just came straight back, and I finished.
And that is why we have the Ministry of Utmost Happiness. But in that context, I would like to ask you, this mob-induced or the majoritarian-induced censorship that you spoke about, it is kind of dictating the literary landscape that we have. And we have writers like Arundhati Roy, but we also have writers who chose to crawl when they are being asked to bend. I mean, there are editors, there are journalists who do that, there are writers who do that.
Writers, actors,
Actors,
people,
everyone, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody
Very,
in the
very
social...
sad.
Yeah, so not everybody has the nerve to stand up. So how do you think it is altering this literary landscape? How is it affecting a writer? Even when he is conceiving, that first seed of a story that he wants to write. Is that a problem?
See, I think there are two factors that are affecting the landscape. And of course, there are many, but I'm just saying, on the one hand, there is the market, and that, in a way, historically has blunted the impact of literature in ways that are very sad. That publishers and booksellers and writers now just look at numbers, So, like what I said, people who might be writing something beautiful, but which is not marketable or not a bestseller or not a seller even, are not being published. Whereas historically, this was not the case. There were always publishers who would stand by literature that they believed in. And now publishers look at books as if they are selling soap or mosquito repellent, It's really very, very sad. Recently, just a few days ago, the Ministry of Utmost Happiness had been translated into Urdu and Hindi. And Urdu, of course, is a very, very integral part of the understanding of the conflict of Urdu, Hindi, all that is very much part of the book. And, there are no Urdu publishers in India anymore except vanity publishers, people who take money from writers for their books to be published. Because there's an attempt to kind of take away the oxygen from that language. So that's one form of change in the literary landscape. And the other, as you said, is this fear of the mob, this fear of this current regime, this fear of not just the regime, but this very, very complex society, which is now, where people, communities, castes are censoring each other. Now, the danger of that is that, I've said this many times, perhaps the greater danger than fascism that we face is cretinism, Cretinism, of course, is the foundation of fascism. Just a few days ago, you saw what happened at the National Science Congress. You had the vice-chancellor of a university who calls himself a scientist saying, I've just disproved Einstein's theory. I've just written a letter to Stephen Hawking saying that your understanding of dark matter and the black hole is rubbish, and we should rename magnetic waves as Modi waves. Come on, where are we going, So this form of cretinism, this form of mediocrity, this form of absolute idiocy is what we are up against now. And it's so sad. It's so sad,
Arundhati, it's not just in India, because, we live in very strange times. We have an American president who's put his country at a gunpoint to build a wall to ward off the migrants. And yet, across Europe, the whole refugee crisis, there is this barbed wires being, set up so that you divide people. But, there are these walls within ourselves, the impenetrable ones of caste, of creed, of regionalism. And, as writers approach their creative work, how would you think that would affect, the formation of those characters? And how do you think, through your work, you can decommunalize this society? This regime could go in 2019. but the poison which is spread, it will persist. You know, the solidification of this majoritarianism, populism is there. How would writers deal with that?
Well, you know, the point is that writers are like plumbers or carpenters, or I mean, some of them service that very communalism, that very casteism, you know. So writers are not a separate, homogeneous species with lofty motives, you know. So it depends on, obviously, what kind of a writer you are, you know. And the truth is that as everything, you know, whether it is pedagogy, whether it is syllabus, whether it is history writing, whether it is the industry of medicine, all of it now is being controlled by a form of capital which makes a conflict of interest inevitable, you know. So until we understand that, I mean, we can spend our lives criticizing the media, the corporate agenda, but until you understand the structures, the economic structures of those institutions, the caste structure of that institution, you know, I think we are a society that has, that is incredibly hypocritical, who will not face up to what we have constructed socially. I mean, there are societies, all societies are unequal, but caste is something in which you actually worship inequality, in which you institutionalize inequality. So until we face up and correct things in our own history, just in the telling of the story to begin with, because I do believe that human society, one of the fundamental in our cellular structure is which story we choose to believe and which story we all subscribe to, which then makes us a community. And so that is something we have to, I mean, those of us who do see the discrepancies or the untruths that we have subscribed to so far, have to work towards correcting them.
You know, in your book, you have created this Jannat guest house. Is that your La La Land, your dream world, or utopia that you would like to see in the outside universe? You know, there's a transgender, there's a Muslim, everybody living, all these shattered souls living in complete harmony, you know, evolving, giving to each other. Is that the utopia that you wanted to project to the outside world?
Well, the Jannat guest house is I mean, I don't know if it's a utopia, but certainly it's, I didn't create it as a utopia. You know, it happened that all the characters in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, starting with Anjum, who used to be Aftab, have these borders running through them, incendiary borders running through them. Anjum has the border of gender, but she's a Shia Muslim, born a boy, who becomes Anjum. And in these times, in fact, the fact that she's a Muslim is much more dangerous than the fact that she's a trans person, you know. So she, in fact, gets caught up in the Gujarat massacre and survives. She gets caught up because she's a Muslim, but survives because she's a Hijra, you know. But there is Saddam Hussein, who has the border of caste and religious conversion. There's Musa, who has a national border. There's Garson Hobart, an intelligence officer whose half of him is the state that can wait, that can put every cruelty in some kind of historical context and wait. And half of him is this drunken sort of lover, a complete failure, who can look at himself with a lot of humor and so on. There's Tilotama, a strange woman, also with the border of
that's
caste
yourself, right? There's a lot of autobiographical elements when you call her strange.
Tilotama, she's the child of Velita and Amu in my head, from the God of Small Things. But So when the Anjum who leaves, who's unable to collect herself, after her experience in the killings of Gujarat, she moves into a graveyard where she suffers from this wild and inconsolable grief, and then slowly gathers herself and then begins to build a guest house in the graveyard. And of course you have the Jannat, which means paradise, guest house in a Delhi graveyard. Meanwhile you have in the Jannat of Kashmir covered with other graveyards. And so one is talking about a situation where the dead and the living are in constant conversation. And when I actually suddenly thought about it. If you look at who lives in the Jannat guest house, who dies and who's buried in that graveyard, what are the prayers that are said from the Fatiha to the recitation of Shakespeare to the singing of the Internationale, in a way, it is the revolution that we want,
And when you're talking about fiction as truth, fiction requires a lot of imagination, unbridled imagination. But because you're a political writer, and this novel is essentially very political, how do you strike that balance between the fiction and the reality?
I think the reason I said fiction is truth is because it's not something that I said, it's something that Fellini said, And it's a mistake to think that there is a sort of polar oppositeness between fiction and fact, between fiction and truth. Fiction is a writer's deepening of their understanding of what goes on, even science fiction, So that it isn't necessarily, it's just a different way of deepening things, So, for instance, like I said, if you look at Kashmir, there is a part I'm giving you an example. There's a part in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness where there is a captain in the Indian Army called Amrik Singh, who's gone wild, in the sense that he has been used by the state to do things which are absolutely not things that should be done. And then he has taken the license to do many more things. At one point, he goes to visit a Kashmiri family, and they're sitting down and eating and drinking, and he's very jolly, and he takes off his belt and he puts his gun down there among the cakes and the biscuits, and there is a conflict between him and the son of the house, Musa. And at some point, Amrik Singh gets up to go, and he pretends to forget his gun, And then when the family gives him the gun, he says, well, imagine if I had forgotten it here. Even I wouldn't have been able to save you if a coordinate search operation found it. Now, leaving a gun among the biscuits is not a human rights violation, But it tells you, in a way, only fiction can tell you how the air is seeded with terror. Or let's say a captain who calls himself Captain Jan Baz goes to a village. And one of the characters in the book is called Gulrez. He's slightly, he's a mutt, what the Kashmiris call a mutt, slightly special person who has this very, very precious relationship with a rooster, with a Puankori, he calls Sultan. He loves Sultan. They both have a little universe of their own. And Jan Baz goes to the village for no big reason, just goes to lecture the villagers about, how to behave and what to do, and boast a little and terrorize them routinely. He has this Alsatian dog. And as he's leaving, he just says, fetch. And the dog goes and kills Sultan. It devastates Gulrez. It terrorizes the villagers because it's just an application of unreasonable terror that you cannot anticipate. This can't make it into an Amnesty International report, but this can tell you what's going on there, you know? So that's what I mean when I say fiction is truth.
When we listen to her, we can only hope that her universe of fiction remains intact so that we can, enjoy the beauty of it. I'm sure there are a lot of questions coming your way. There's an eager crowd there. But as a journalist, I can't let go of that question. Arundhati, you hit the headlines today for your talk on Gandhi yesterday. And, you have written an introduction for the annihilation of caste where, you've called out Gandhi as a racist and a casteist. And 2 days ago, we had a discussion with author Ramachandra Guha where, in his book, he's elaborated a lot on how Gandhi has evolved, into this Mahatma that we all acknowledge. And I'm sure through your writings and through your speeches, you have quoted a lot on Gandhi's writings from South Africa until 1945, where, the casteism and racism is so evident in your arguments. Let's not go there because you have spoken at length yesterday. But what I would like to ask you is, you have dedicated this book to the unconsoled of the world. But in today's world, Mahatma Gandhi is a flicker of hope for millions. He is a soothing balm for all these shattered souls. Why should we deny the masses of Gandhi, of the Mahatma?
Well, I disagree, because when you use something as a balm, there has to be something historically accurate about that balm, And today, if I just tell you a simple thing, you go to the house of any truly oppressed, truly unconsoled, truly disenfranchised in many ways person in this country, whose portrait will you find there?
And Rajinikanth.
So I'm not saying that there weren't brilliant things about Gandhi. I'm not trying to say that you have to just tarnish him in every way. But I think that we do need to stop this hypocrisy, I do think that we need to face things for what they are. I mean, we're not children, right? We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can say what's good, what's bad. We don't have to fall down and worship at the feet of a myth that's completely untrue. This is what I say.
Now I think I'm going to open the floor for questions. So please raise your hands. I think there's a mic there.
Ma'am, I have some things to ask. Mainly, I hope you will reply. In the current era and recent period, we are witnessing you are from a literature writer and all. So many writers or activists are being sent into prison. By saying the recent date, they had wrote something against the government policies or like that. So, as an activist and as well as a writer, what's your opinion about that? And also, my second question is, like in India...
excuse me, can we stick to one question so that we give equal...
One more. I want to know her reply from that. That's why. In India, the marginalized community, including women, are facing lots of issues today. So,
marginalized community,
including women, are facing lots of issues. In democracy, we say that there is a point for everyone. But is it obstacle or is it destroyed by some majoritarian views like some fascist forces? What's your saying about it?
Well, thank you for asking this question. Very close friends of mine are in prison right now. And all those who have been called urban Naxals after the Bhima Koregaon meet of last year, my friend Professor Sai Baba, who is paralyzed from his waist down, I hope he'll live You know, he's in such great and grievous danger, sentenced to life imprisonment for what? For standing up against Operation Green Hunt, which was an operation, of course, called by the Congress regime against the poorest people in this country. These are things that are part of what is going on. You know, the fact is that whether it is the Hindu nationalism or whether it's market fundamentalism, whether it has been the Congress or the BJP, both have used a kind of rhetoric to become a police state, you know. So in fact, truthfully, there has not been a day since 1947 when the Indian army has not been deployed against, quote, unquote, its own people in this country. Not a single day, you know. And today you are seeing the army, the densest military occupation in Kashmir, where the army is turning into a sort of administrative force, a bloated administrative force in Kashmir. The police in Chhattisgarh are turning into an army. We are living in an age of electronic surveillance. The laws that the government is passing now on the digital front are absolutely terrifying. The Aadhaar card is something that is actually a means of surveillance. And I mean, speaking in a state which has been ruled by communists, I want to say that we are, the whole world, not just now, not just us, we are on the verge of becoming a world in which, because of robotics, because of artificial intelligence, human labor is going to become increasingly irrelevant. Human societies are not going to be required to participate in economic activity. So, what do we do when workers are no longer needed, when the proletariat is no longer required? You know, it's a very, very dangerous situation. Raghuram Rajan's report recently said that India needs to create 12 million jobs a year. Near that, I mean, what is happening is the opposite. GST demonetization is kicking the poorer people out of the economic activity. Privatization of education is pushing even the few OBC, Dalit, Adivasi students that did get a foothold into universities, you know. So we have to understand that this moment is not just about getting the BJP out of power. That too, that's very important. But we've got to understand what we are up against now. We really do, you know.
It's Mike.
Make your question precise. We have time limitation.
My name is Aman. So, good afternoon. My question is to you that you have read about I think you have read about the Supreme Court verdict that has changed Kerala to a war zone, the entry of women to Sabarimala. So, as a woman writer and a social activist, what is your opinion about this Supreme Court verdict, willing or unwilling?
I'll tell you what. My formula is that anything that happens within 1 year of a major election, including Supreme Court verdicts, are all about the election.
Good afternoon, ma'am. What is your opinion on the art versus artist debate that's been going on for a long time? It's got more scrutiny now. So should the art be separated from the artist?
See, I don't have any rules for all this, you know. I mean, that is up to those who want to be commentators. I am somebody who writes what I write, and once I've written it, while I'm doing it, I cannot be separated from it. Once I've done it, it belongs to the world and it can do what it wants. You know, I can't legislate about it.
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, it's a great thing asking question to you because we have been reading about you in our GK books. from class 6 to 8, you have been dominating our GK books.
You're making me feel very old, but anyway, never mind.
Ma'am, I'm just in first year BTech. So, ma'am, it's been 5 or 6 years. You have been dominating our GK books. I must say that. Ma'am, my question is that, ma'am, in the war of left and right, conservative and liberals, fiction and non-fiction, why have been repeatedly the army is being dragged? Ma'am, ma'am, they are distinguishing between who is a criminal, between shooting. They don't discriminate when there is floods in Kashmir, when there is floods in Kerala, who to save and who not to save. Then why they have been dragged? Yeah, they could be misused by the power, but they are not doing anything by themselves. It is not a tyrannical rule in this country.
I think you must go and ask, stand up and say this in Kashmir and ask for them to reply.
Ma'am, they have been saved, but in the floods as well, by the Indian Army itself.
You have to go there and ask them what happened in the floods.
Ma'am, we didn't see any other Kashmiri heroes to be there.
Let's not make this into an argument. We will pass the mic to the next
sorry,
question.
ma'am, but I have respect for you.
Fine, I respect you too. That's what's lovely about us, right?
Hi, good afternoon, ma'am. So I want to ask about your book. So I heard you talk once say that the characters of the ministry actually came and lived in your house and suffocated you into writing the novel. And as I read the novel, I felt a lot of pent-up frustration, anger, and irritation at the things happening in Kashmir, in Delhi, in Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh. So, in a way, are these the two sides of the same coin?
So, I think you may have misunderstood. I was talking about how real the fiction is for me, you know, so that Anjum and Saddam and Garson and all of them just began to live with me, although no one else could see them. And I don't think that you can write a book of fiction which is just about pent-up anger and frustration. You know, it's also about humor. It's also about poetry. It's also about love, the strangest kinds of love, many different kinds of love. You know, so honestly, you know, when people say that the God of Small Things was lyrical, the Ministry of Utmost Happiness is political, I don't understand, because what people do is they try to like for instance, what could be more political than the love between Velita and Amu in The God of Small Things? It had me in court on a criminal charge for corrupting public morality for 10 years. Every time the judge would come and say, every time this case comes before me, I get chest pains. And then he would postpone it, you know. The ministry, and again, I'll say this is what fiction does. All of us are gradually being trained to think of what happens around us in subjects. I write about caste, my specialization is Kashmir, so-and-so deals with gender, so-and-so deals with development, so-and-so deals with X, Y, and Z. But this is all the air we breathe. This is what we breathe in, and this is what we breathe out. So, in fact, to not write about these things is an act of some very complicated yoga posture, you know, where you're trying not to see what's sitting right in front of you. And what fiction does, by connecting all of this, by accepting that this is the air we breathe, it gives you the radical understanding of how these things are connected to each other, you know. And that is why I say fiction is a universe, because it accepts and breathes. Like for me, I cannot think of writing a book which is a manifesto pretending to be a story. I cannot think of writing a book where XYZ is in the background and then the foreground is this. In the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, the background becomes the foreground. History kicks the door in at 2 in the morning. You deal head on with the atmosphere in which you live without being scared. I mean, to me, a fiction writer should be as easy about intimacy and love as with violence, as with betrayal, as with irrigation, as with displacement, as with whatever the complexities are that we live in, you know?
Hello, ma'am. Hi. I'm very glad you mentioned about the human labor being redundant, and that is what I want to ask you about. So I read a book by Yuval Noah Harari called Sapiens, and where he says that by 2050, you know, humans will not be underemployed, they'll be unemployable. And I read this book by Arun Bastani, Fully Automated Luxury Communism, and stuff like that. I was very glad that those books are coming now. So, do you really think that, yes, the market is a beast and no social democracy can contain it because it is destroying all the institutions, it is destroying human labor itself, the proletariat? Do you really think that Marx is back in our story and there's a very bright future where we can really see that all these automation could be used for people and not for exploiting them? What are your views?
I don't think that that's going to happen, because even today, you know, the place where human society fails, capitalist society fails, is in distribution. I mean, we know that there is money, but it's not evenly distributed. There are goods, they are not evenly distributed. There is food, there's not evenly distributed. So there is a problem in assuming that power will be in a few hands and then the surplus will be distributed to people, you know. So I do think that young people have to find a way in which to assert that they will not allow this further and further concentration of power, you know. Well, I hope so, but it won't necessarily be, I don't think it'll necessarily be the revolution that Marx thought about, you know. But it has, because I think conceptually we are in, you know, there was a period of industrialization and mechanization where human beings used machines to increase surplus. But now, the machines are replacing human beings, you know. There is a debate about what is human. So these are things we have to think about, you know. And I do feel very nervous about the fact that there are chemical weapons programs, smart nuke programs, programs where people are thinking about targeting specific populations, you know, because that will be how eventually climate change and so on might be dealt with. So we have to start thinking very, very fast.
We would love to hear more from you, Arundhati, but for lack of time, I'll have to wrap it up. And I would like to thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, thank you.
And thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you.
I invite Sadi Aravi, Joint Convener of Program Committee, to present a small token of gratitude to our guest. There is a book signing session after this. Join her and get your copy signed. Next, Space Science and the Physics of the Universe. G. Madhavan Nair in conversation with Rakesh Sharma. Rakesh Sharma is an astronaut who is the first Indian to land on space on April 2nd, 1984. He moved to outer space in the Russian-made Soyuz T-11